Hello. I cannot hear you.
I had myself muted, I think. I don't know why I defaulted to that, but that's what it was going on.
Well, how are you doing today, Chris?
I'm good. End of a typical Monday roast day, so getting ready to do this and make dinner afterwards, and it'll be dark in about half an hour outside. It's typical New England, so this time of year it's pretty depressing when the sun literally sets at 4:30, but it does. So
Yeah. Yeah, we're not that far, we're not as far north as you guys, so we
yeah.
still get like that 5:15 sun setting, so
Yeah, I think it's being north, and I also think everybody kind of forgets how like east we are as well. So just like everything just doesn't play to our favor. We probably should be in like a different time zone, but that's never going to happen. So just need to get rid of daylight savings time is really what the answer should be.
yeah. Yeah. I'm dying. Well, thank you so much for hopping on a video call. This is kind of I think you might be the first person I'm like kind of interviewing like this
Sure.
that I kind of have lined up. And so I was
Cool.
kind of, we've done, on our website, we've got interviews with every roastery we've had for our subscription.
Right.
And so it's kind of nice to just, I have questions,
Yeah, of course.
I don't know things. And the fact
None
that
of us really do. We just kind of make it up as we go along. I think that's the main takeaway from all of this. But
I I was briefly, kind of looking over kind of your information of, what I had written down of learning about you guys
sure.
and yeah, one of the things that I noticed, and I guess is a perfect segue into, briefly tell your story of how you got into coffee. But I think one of the things was that you didn't have too much experience when you wanted to, right? Or something along those lines.
Yeah, I mean, so before doing coffee stuff, I was it sounds stupid. Before I was in coffee, I wasn't in coffee. Yeah, of course. But like when I like my coffee journey kind of started while I was still doing a different job. I was just working kind of working from home. It was related to like finance, taxes, that kind of stuff. So like nothing to do with tax with coffee whatsoever. My now wife, then girlfriend, Melissa was working at Amazon in Seattle. I think it was actually like an internship. So it was like a short-term thing, but like we were going to be there for like a year or two. And since I was working from home, I was like, sure, might as well go to Seattle. Why not? Sounds great. We both were on the East Coast up until then. So we went to Seattle. She did her thing, I did my thing, but like just, I mean, 10, might have been like 11 or 12 years ago, actually, is really when this was. So like during that time, like Seattle, I mean, it still is no diss to any Seattle people listening out there, but like Seattle really was during that time was like coffee capital of the US, right? It like still very much was just everything people think of stereotypically with Seattle and coffee. So of course, like that was really where we first just kind of like fell in love with coffee. And I think it was, just like having the flexibility to kind of take advantage and visit coffee shops in the way that like people now visit our coffee shop. Like just we really took to like the communities and the just the way everybody was like treated there and of course like just all the eyes opening our typical like specialty coffee first experience, all that kind of stuff. So that was really where we first kind of fell in love with it. Again, I was working from home, so I had a decent amount of free time. And just as like me in the background, like background on me is like I'm incredibly obsessive in the way that like I want to know everything there is to know about something that like I'm interested in. Like I want to know like take apart the watch and know how the watch works, right? That kind of thing. So once I started getting interested in coffee, it was like just a very slippery slope of like, we're buying coffee machines, we're buying an espresso machine, quickly realizing this espresso machine sucks, and then like buying another espresso machine, grinders. The logical conclusion was like I started roasting coffee at home. I had like a little a Quest M3, which I still have, but is technically collecting dust. It used to be our sample roaster years and years ago. Long since upgraded that. But yeah, basically just kind of doing everything for ourselves, in all the ways, still taking a part of the, just enjoying the coffee community that was out there. Um, Fast forward just a little bit, we ended up leaving Seattle, and coming back to the East Coast, just the way life was taking us. So we weren't there in a long amount of time, but it was enough to like really just set this spark off. So coming back to the East Coast, I still had the other job that I was doing, but it was kind of always like it was a good job, it was a good career, but it wasn't like something I was super passionate about. So, I mean, I'm skipping probably a bunch of details, but basically just opportunities kind of presented itself that we were able to take a stab at maybe trying to turn this coffee passion into like something that might actually make money. And before we knew it, we had a lease on a space and, we're standing in there going like, what the hell are we thinking? But at this point, it's happening. So, uh, yeah, before we knew it, we were doing this. And I should say, like, when we first opened the space and started the company, um, we were always going to be a roaster. And I think in our minds, even up until the day we opened the doors, we were basically a roaster, not necessarily a cafe. Like we kind of had like the naive idea we were just going to be more of like a tasting room in the way that like a distillery would have or a brewery would have. And so, yes, we had ways and means to brew coffee, but we figured we'd be open like twice a week, couple hours, maybe whatever, and quickly realized that people don't really take to that. So before we knew it, we had like a an actual cafe obligation at the same time, right from day one. So
That is funny. I don't know about you, but in the US, I haven't been to that kind of like
yeah,
setup of a roastery and a tasting room.
yeah,
I know of a few in Europe, and I think I know one or two in Asia. And I haven't been to these, I just follow them.
sure.
It has always intrigued me. How how do you how do you get them to come in and like how much? Yeah, I don't know. So that's just kind of it's interesting to hear your side. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think we just were like, I think we probably always figured we would serve coffee. So like the space that we picked, because we were not intending to be a coffee shop, like we wanted to be in a small town. We wanted to be like accessible so people could get there without being like, yeah, it's like take three turns, make a left at the pink building, go down a driveway. We didn't want it to be like incredibly obscure, but at the same time, we didn't want a space that was going to have like 50,000 people a day in foot traffic. Like we didn't want to have the doors broken down the first day we got there.
Mhm.
Um, so again, we had a good space that was accessible by car, is pretty obvious to find once you knew it. Um, so I think we always knew it would like grow into something else, but I think it just became like, oh, we need to be open like with regularity, like within the first month. And all this was, literally just actually originally it was literally just me. Melissa was still working at like a normal typical job at this point in time, just to, like kind of help us out. And so I was literally, I mean, there were many days where I'd be like roasting coffee. Somebody would come in and I'd like leave the roaster, go serve coffee for them, run back to the roaster, try not to
Wow.
make it in the middle of a batch of coffee, whatever. And then of course close the coffee shop and then go, oh, okay, now we got to package all this coffee. Now we got to ship all this coffee. So it was a one-man show and then a two-man show for quite a long time. But I think all that to say, like coming full circle, like we didn't have a ton of like commercial coffee experience. We knew people in the industry at this point that like were able to bounce ideas off and make sure we weren't like completely crazy. But I think there's just so much that you just don't know until you do know.
Yeah.
And it was very much just kind of like, I think we had a good product from day one. Hopefully it's only ever improved. But other than that, I think a lot of it was just continually trying to, make the right decisions and grow as things came up, adding pastries, adding tea, adding seating, like all those just things. We did it one thing at a time. And um, fortunately the community was supportive along the way and still is. In a weird way, I think it actually kind of helped us because we just not knowing so much, other than like, generally how a business functions financially, which is helpful. And I think a lot of people gloss over that fact when we're opening coffee shops. We just think we're going to make coffee and serve our friends all day, and it's not all that. So we had that aspect of it down, which is good, but the nuances of a cafe, I think, were just like, it was good to be able to like pick one thing and like focus on that and then go, okay, this makes sense because we now see like this is how it works and what have you. And none of this here or anything else future to say like it's not to say we didn't ever make mistakes. We're lucky we never made a mistake that we were like out 100 grand because it was some terrible decision. But like, sure, I'm sure there's things we did and we were like, oh no, this doesn't make any sense. But yeah, that's just how things go. We still are constantly always iterating and trying to figure out how you can improve or whatever. But
Yeah, yeah. Well, what kind of got you to the point where you said, not like I want to work in coffee, right? But
sure.
why was your focus a roastery? Like why wasn't it the cafe side? That's kind of just interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, my first inclination was to say it was like easier, and it's not easier, but like and maybe it's easier to understand, or you're less like front and center for like all those little failures to show up, if that makes sense. And I guess I should also say like this is from the, 10 years ago, us thinking like it'll be easier, like, oh, we'll be in a warehouse, we'll sell coffee, whatever, it's not crazy other than like the actual science of roasting the coffee.
Yeah.
We did come to find out that obviously uh, roasting and selling coffee is like really difficult from a sales point of view. Like, this is even more now, but like there's always tons of coffee roasters, and we've sent so much coffee even today that like you send coffee to people and you never hear back from them again. And it's just like it's just like any other sales gig at the end of the day. But I think for me at least, like the community and like the serving the people and creating the atmosphere for people to come into, that's really important to us. I think that's something that like kind of was always important. Like that's what we loved in Seattle, and it felt like was missing maybe over on the East Coast. And like if I had one negative for coffee shops again 10, 12 years ago, was like it was still very like standoffish and like this cliquey like exclusive club that was like we were treating it so like borderline pretentious that I think it just like pushed so many people away. So it was important to us to like break down those barriers and try to not be that. We wanted to be extremely accessible. Again, like we're in a small town. When we first opened serving coffee, like we always had syrups from day one. It was just like we're just going to do them well, like we can't just be, oh no, you can't have milk. Like there's a Dunkin' Donuts down the street. Nobody's ever going to come in again. And just kind of having that attitude. So that was important to us. And again, like I think we always wanted to open a more retail focused cafe, but I think the romantic aspect of just like having full control over your product and like being able to like create a product for people to enjoy, I think was um at least originally it was like more appealing. And I think the thought was like we'll make this product, have a good product. Maybe we'll serve it at like events and like farmers markets and whatever, get people's appetite whet.
Yeah.
And then like, no, we have this really good product, and then like iterate onto into the cafe. I guess a simpler answer is really just I think roasting or like being a roastery or a product focused business was like it felt like there were less unknowns to us. So like if you're gonna do one or the other, it was like from our background, it was like we'll start with the roastery and then add a cafe, versus start a cafe, buy somebody else's coffee, and then somehow figure out how to roast afterwards. So yeah, it was just I think it's more so, and I probably haven't done a good job representing this, but it was more like we probably want to do both, but like which do you start with? And starting with the roasteries seemed to make more sense. But
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love that answer. It's really, I mean, we had conversations probably back in, April or May of, this one coffee that we got, that Finca like La Cita or something like the Bolivia.
yeah,
We
yeah,
got this one, coffee, and like the first roast was amazing. And then for some reason the second one was off, and I really don't know why. But
yeah.
no one like you has done such a good job of getting back like you are so detailed. And, like In well, like, okay, for those, I should probably give better context if anyone's, watching or listening. But basically, we'd gotten this Bolivia. It was absolutely amazing on pour over, and a second shipment that we got, something was just a little different, and we couldn't
Yeah,
figure
it's
out why.
organic product, so yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and the fact that, I'd reached out and I don't remember, what I said, but I must have been like, I don't know, man, something's wrong.
Sure,
Um, but I've never had any roaster reply so amazingly as you did. Like it was genuinely remarkable your just layout of look, here's what it is.
sure,
And we've, in the past we've had other, roasters where a similar situation happened. And I just thought it was like unbelievably noteworthy that you had kind of just as much as you could broke it down for us because I mean, we're over here, we're not roasters. We don't know what green's like, we don't know what storing's like,
sure.
we don't know what anything's like. And so I'm just
Yeah,
so
and I mean the flip side for us also that's weird is like being a roaster in general, even good things or bad things, is like we're roasting coffee. Like the whole supply chain of coffee from the moment the coffee is grown, picked, all the way down. If you're really cynical, but it's kind of true, it's only going to get worse every step of the way. The coffee can't really get better. If I buy really crappy coffee, I can't make it taste better. I can buy the best coffee in the world and I can make it taste terrible. Or at least the most expensive coffee in the world and make it taste terrible. But the point being, like, we make this product, well, we don't make it, but we roast this product to like where we think it tastes best to us. But then you hand it off and like generally you don't know what the hell happens to it.
right.
Again, you could have people that it's blowing their mind. You could have people that are thrown in the garbage after one cup. You just don't know. And also with that, and it's hard to know what people are doing along the way. Maybe somebody thinks it's terrible, but it turns out they're brewing like 1 to 10 in 90 seconds. Like, yeah, it's not going to taste good, but like, yeah, if you do 1 to 10 in 90 seconds and you love it, then cool. That's cool too. Like you just don't know. We're putting a product out there. It's like somebody that makes the most expensive wagyu in the world, and then, you cook it till it's well done. Like,
Yeah.
you may not like it. It's still a product. It's an ingredient at the end of the day. So I think the hard thing is like you're always going to put it out into the world. And sure, when somebody says like, and it's not just you. I mean, especially like direct like consumers all the time, probably more so than wholesale. But like
Yeah.
consumers will get emails all the time that like just things don't work out for them or it's not what they expected or whatever it may be. And of course, as your first instinct is because like we made this product the way it is, like it's hard not to be defensive. At the very least, you're going to be like a little bit upset about it. But I think what's important for me is like to try to figure out like either what was missed or like more importantly like what you can improve from it, right? And like I joked earlier at the beginning of our conversation is like I still think there's just so much we all don't really know. So, these opportunities are ways to try to learn and let me learn as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, maybe there's something that like of course we do our own quality control and what have you, but there's any number of things that could come up along the way and I think we learn from it and grow from it. But I do think I mean customer service, like I said, in the retail is incredibly important to us, like creating this like welcoming environment and like a place that people feel like they fit in, belong, and can do whatever guilt-free, without judgment, all that kind of stuff. But when it comes to wholesale, when it comes to online, like we try to do the best to have that same experience as much as you can while being across the country from people. So if that means like refunding somebody because they just don't like it, even if they're right, wrong, or indifferent, it doesn't matter, like just making sure that people are happy.
Mm.
Um, if we can help offer suggestions that do end up improving it, great. If we offer suggestions and they don't make it better, oh well, at least you tried. It's better than somebody reaching out saying they don't like it and us being like, you're wrong, sorry. And there's people that would do that. And it's just like that upsets me more than somebody just not having the same taste as us. Because I think that's the other thing with like with coffee that makes it so hard is this is an incredibly like subjective product, right? Um, my favorite coffee could be somebody's least favorite coffee. That happens all the time. So it is what you're tasting is like a reflection of our palate and what we think is tasty, but
Yeah.
I fully recognize that that's not going to be everybody else's. Everybody else is not going to agree with me. Um, so you try to make everybody happy, but of course you're never going to. So you kind of got to stay true to yourself, I guess.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you guys do such a good job. And, it's funny that, you guys are based in the US. And so, me being in the US, it's so easy to communicate. But nonetheless,
Sure.
there's still, the roasters that, have a harder time keeping up even. And so that's been something I've always it's just a random one off, but something I've always valued about you guys.
Coffee people are also not always very good about communication. It's not like anybody in particular that I'm poking fun at or whatever, but I see it all the time on my end, whether it's me buying equipment from a vendor or what have you, like communication is not always great. So I think again, that's something that like I try to make sure that we are good at so that, maybe it does stick out. And again, coming full circle just on a pure business point of view, like we're selling coffee. We are basically just doing sales when it comes to being a roastery. So, you know, admitting when you're wrong and going the extra mile, being responsive, whatever, all those little things like hopefully make a difference. I mean, it seems like they do make a difference, at least in this case. So that's why we try to do it. It's easy to get upset and just like pout about it and like not do anything productive. So it's kind of
Yeah.
like, how do we make this better? How do we make this right? Whatever it may be.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
So when you started roasting in your new space, were there other roasters that were kind of big inspirations to you during that time, or that you, yeah, kind of wanted to mimic, or yeah.
yeah, I mean, yes. I think probably the bias was predominantly towards um probably like the Pacific Northwest, just because that's like where we have been, we've physically been there. So like your typical mainstays of everything from like Hart to Guava, Olympia, like
Yeah.
all actually probably our favorite roaster by the time we left Seattle was Elm.
Yeah.
And I still think they're doing a good job. Full disclosure, I pretty much never drink any I don't not drink any coffee in their own coffee, but like we don't brew coffee at home like barely ever, as weird as that is. And it's just because I don't know the nature of having a coffee shop that we're still at pretty actively like day in and day out. It's like I just drink most of my coffee there. So like I like to buy bags of coffee from other people to see what other people are doing and enjoy what they're doing. But at the same time, I buy a bag and I'll brew 2 cups of it and the rest of it just sits there. We just don't go through a lot of coffee. So I'm weirdly like kind of out of touch with a lot of there's just so much out there, right? So you're just always trying to try different things. But
Yeah.
Elm was definitely one of our favorites at the time.
Yeah.
Trying to think who else was like anybody who was like the typical like cool popular coffee people at the time is probably what we were drinking. I remember when Go Get 'em Tiger first started,
Yeah.
and we were buying coffee from them. There was like 49th Parallel was big for a while. Uh, yeah, not a lot from the East Coast that I can really think about, weirdly.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I think there's still probably more coffee on the West Coast than there is on the East Coast now.
Yeah.
Um, but I mean, despite what I said about not buying a lot of coffee, certainly whenever we travel, true now and then was like, let's go find a new coffee place. I weirdly, so like in our area in Boston, when we first opened, and they're still here, but Counterculture had a training lab, and they were like most of the coffee shops around Boston. So like you drank a lot of Counterculture. But at the same time, if I'm on the road halfway across the country and this shop serving Counterculture, I'd rather go somewhere else because I want to try something that I'm not having all the time, right? Um, so it's nothing against their coffee. It's just I want to try as much as you possibly can. And I think that was important to us, especially early on, is just seeing like what's out there. You can't live in your own bubble and be like, this is the only coffee that's good and it's not know what else is out there. But
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's really neat. And, starting your own roastery, I can't imagine, looking for roasters. There's so
sure.
many in the world. how in the world did you finally decide on one, and why that one, the Probat?
Yeah, so I mean, same thing. I looked at every single option out there. Again, me being like kind of overly analytical and obsessive, like I tried to find as much information as I could about everything out there. The very simple answer and truly what it came down to was like the coffee that we liked, those roasters that we liked. It kind of came down to like, well, what are they roasting on?
Yep.
Um, and more often than not, it was a typical drum roaster or Probat. Loring wasn't as big at the time, but people did have Lorings. Um, and I think at the time, even then, it was like we just didn't like the coffee off of them as much as a Probat. So there's other like
Yeah.
traditional drum roasters out there, but I think just Probat being Probat, they've been around for so long, it was just kind of the obvious choice. Um, They were, and they are a little less now. They were very like bare bones. So that was like one concern maybe that I had was like, oh, I don't have any fan control. I don't have any like, it's basically just flame. That's it. Um, but at the end of the day, it's like it's what worked. I talked to a couple other people. Actually, one other roaster I forgot about at the time that was they were just starting, but obviously incredibly popular was Cat and Cloud. And I know they had like a Gießen at the time, and I did talk to them at some point about like their experiences with it. Because that was one of the other considerations. Because on paper it was like, well, this is basically a Probat, just like with shinier things. Um, and at the end of the day, it just kind of sounded like more gadgets and levers sometimes means more things to break. So
Hmm.
the Probat works. And so that's eventually you had to pick one, you had to make a decision, and that's what we went with. So
Yeah.
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 But ultimately just that was the coffee that we liked the best. It just had that extra whatever it was. If you were to taste a whole bunch of coffees blind, you probably were gonna pick the coffee off of a Probat or similar Probat, yeah.
You're the second person I've ever heard say this like kind of exact answer. We
Yeah.
Right now we're carrying a roaster in Tokyo called Leaves, if you've heard of them.
Yeah, I have, yeah.
Yeah, and the owner Yasu, he said the same thing. He was kind of, I was just like, why are you roasting on a Probat? And apparently he was like, yeah, kind of just searched the world for the best coffees from all the roasters, and all the roasters were using a Probat. And I was like, that's crazy that you would
Yeah,
pay
and
that much attention.
you're also you're not gonna find a lot of people, at least from like on what they're getting out of the coffee. I don't think you'll find a lot of roasters that are like, oh yeah, like I just can't get what I want out of this coffee off the Probat. Like if you were to ask a whole bunch of people and be like, is your roaster like holding you back or like negatively infecting your coffee? I don't think anybody with a Probat's going to say like yes, it's holding it's hurting our coffee in any small way. I don't think you're going to see that. Um, I do think some other roasters, maybe if they're being honest, they're going to admit that there's probably some other machines that they would say, yeah, are probably, not exactly what they would want from the coffee, but they stick with the machine for some other reason, which is fine. It's valid. But yeah, I think that's kind of what it came down to is just weirdly simpler is better, and some secret sauce that they have seems to work. But
The secret sauce.
yeah,
It is funny, of all the roasters that we work with on like a longer-ish term basis, including you guys, is we let's see, you, Leaves, and in Momos in South Korea.
oh yeah, yeah,
So actually, Probat is kind of like the big, like, of all the roasters, everyone else kind of roasts on something different. So it's kind of
yeah.
funny that we happen to have three roasters that actually all use the Probat in some way, which is kind of neat. It's just, I don't know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think if I'm being more technical and specific, also like what we did like in the coffee, I think was like it's both a combination of like balance, like of course you're getting like that sweetness, but like it's easy to make coffee that's soluble and like easily to extract. And also usually just like acidity. Like the coffee off of a traditional drum roaster, like a Probat, just tends to have like more of that pop. Um, if you have like a roaster that's like more indirectly heated or like has air recirculation and stuff like that, I think they they can be. I'm not saying every coffee off of this is bad, but like they can be a little bit like more muted or a little bit flatter, or you get weird things where, um, like with a traditional drum roaster, one of the concerns you have is that you could like burn the outside of the bean and then like underdevelop the inside of the bean. Well, with these new roasters, you can actually get the opposite because there's not enough conduction. So you can underdevelop the outside of the bean and have like a roasty inside of the bean. And it's very weird because you'll get a combination of these like kind of vegetal flavors, but it's kind of roasty at the same time. And you're like, I don't understand what's going on here. Um, Again, it's not to say like every coffee is bad. It's just like that's what you're like we're trying to fight one thing, they're trying to fight another thing. And that's just how these are the evils that I choose for ourselves is the Probat. And I should say also like we started with the Probat P12. It was the P12 2. I think we literally got like one of the first ones off the line because halfway through our order, they're like, "You're getting the new one." And I was like, "What new one?" We got it, and obviously it was good because fast forward to today, in the last like 2 years, we did. I mean, technically it's a different line, but we bought a bigger, newer roaster, but it's still a Probat. We didn't like spend 6, 7 years with a Probat and go, got to get away from this thing. You know, we stuck with what we liked. So, and
Yeah.
again, knock on wood, it's treated us well so far. So, fans of the simple big old flame spinny drum. That's all we really want, you know.
I'm, I'm so glad to hear that. I'm so glad to hear that. It is neat also for us, kind of with the other roasters that we work with, like home ground that we've recently started working with in Singapore. Like they roast on a Gießen, which they're the only roaster that we work with, or I think,
There's not a lot in the US still, but
yeah,
it
yeah. So
seems like
like,
there's a lot in like Asia and probably Europe and stuff. But
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, it's just interesting. There's still some drum roasters out there just absolutely doing a great job. And it like makes me happy, not to like, nothing against like the new roasters, like, I don't know, the really nice Lorings or, whatever. But I don't know, it's kind of nice that like, yeah, like you said, the simple things still work. They do a
Yeah.
good job. You don't
And
sometimes,
there is like there's also again there is less things to go wrong as well, you know.
yeah.
You look at some of the new roasters, and it's like flying a spaceship. And yes, that can potentially be good. You get lots of things that maybe you have a little bit more control or things to tweak, but you also it's hard to zero in on like what's the thing that's going wrong when you have so many different levers to pull. So,
Right.
um, yeah, simpler sometimes is better, or at least maybe more consistent. I don't know. Um, yeah,
Yeah.
whatever it is, it suits our palate. It's what we liked. I remember also this was after we had already bought a roaster, I'm pretty sure. But I think James Hoffman, again, it was years ago, it was before he's as incredibly popular as he is now. But he still was doing like these social experiment kind of things. And one of the ones was like the same coffee roasted on 5 different roasters or something like that. And it was like a kit that they like did. And I remember buying it, and I honestly don't remember. I seriously doubt I was like, this is the Probat, but I'm pretty sure that it was interesting tasting the differences, first of all, just like these are theoretically roasted the same exact way on 5 different machines, but um I'm pretty sure we did pick like the drum roasters, even if it wasn't like this is the Probat, this is the Gießen, whatever, you know. Um,
Yeah.
it's interesting. It's an interesting like experiment you don't really get to try in real life. Especially coming back to your original question of like buying a roaster, you don't really get the opportunity to try. I mean, physically roasting on them, first of all, but even just like further, like, does this product taste good? I mean, I don't think you have an option other than like relying on what other roasters are doing with them. It's basically your only choice. And these things are expensive as hell too, so it's not some light decision.
Not like a few grand. It's like,
Oh, it's like a small house sometimes. So
oh yeah, I don't. It's wild. Some of the I recently found out how much like some of the loorings cost,
floorings are incredibly expensive. Yeah,
and that scared me.
it's a big investment. You know, I mean, we're fortunate in that these machines do tend to hold their value because people do want them. But yeah, I mean, starting a roaster is a huge investment. There's a lot of more recently in the last like 2 years. There's like the big shop roaster trend, and I think that's making the barrier entry a little bit better. But yeah, it's expensive. It's one thing to like want to start roasting your own coffee for the romantic ideas of like I want to have more control over my product, but like for financial reasons, a cafe transitioning to a roastery, it's it's not as cut and dry as like, well, coffee's cheaper, like it is, but there's a lot that goes into it, right? It's not just that simple. It's a big investment, emotionally, financially, everything. So
Yeah. Yeah. So in terms of quality control,
sure.
I've actually only had uh, a, basically only 6 months worth of experience ever working at a roastery in LA.
Yeah.
And, that's quite honestly the only like idea I have of what QC looks like, and I'm sure every roastery is different, in every way. So generally
Yeah.
wondering like, what does that look like? I mean, is it just tasting crazy every, like, yeah, I just generally don't know.
Yeah, I mean, we do the typical basic stuff of taste the coffee as we roast it, or not as we roast it, but whatever. Usually the next day, or at least once a week, we'll taste everything that we roasted through that week.
Yeah.
There's a couple things I think we're very fortunate, or I'm very fortunate in that like we have the cafe physically right next to each other and we serve like all of our coffee there. So it's very easy both to just literally be like, I'm gonna brew a pour over of any of these coffees day in and day out as like just kind of like passive quality control. Or like how is this coffee evolving over the weeks, months, whatever.
Yeah.
Um, Same thing. We pull it on espresso. We pull everything on espresso at our cafe. We don't just do like only a blend ever. So like we'll brew everything. So like we get a lot of hands-on time with everybody, like being able to taste all these coffees. Again, it's not like the first line of defense, but like it's especially in a coffee that we've had for a while, like it's good to be able to do those kind of things passively as opposed to being a roastery that's all by themselves. And yeah, you probably have your own equipment, but you don't get to see it in like the day in, day out kind of thing. And customer feedback too, I guess. Um, Really though, the biggest thing, the thing that like stops something from getting shipped out or what have you is I mean I'm huge on all the data that we have access to nowadays. So like we roast everything on Cropster, always have.
Yeah.
Not unique in that, pretty much everybody does, I think. But I think being so focused even before the roast day is even done on um every roast, making sure like I don't even we do, but I don't even have to taste the coffee, and I probably know it's going to be fine or not before, like as soon as the roast coffee comes out of the roast, because we just have so many hours, so much experience with roasting these coffees and knowing what we thought tasted good a week ago. If it looks like this, if it looks like that today, it's probably going to taste good too. Again, of course, we do the actual like the tasting of it, but I mean, the data's there. It's not as like um maybe some of the artistry is lost in it, but like it's hard to argue with the data, or at least having it and being able to look back at it. And I think that's another thing that um we'll do also is like so we do then taste the coffee and maybe something doesn't taste right. The first thing I'm going to do is go back and look and yeah, I probably already thought it looked okay on the data, but then go back and look at it again and be like, wait, what is different here? Like, what are these small things? That's probably what I did when you reached out also was like go back and look at not only look at every single roast we did that week and compare them both to themselves and then also to like whatever the reference was and
Yeah.
see like is there something here? Yeah, but quality control wise on a more technical level, like after the fact, we're always looking for making sure the coffees are like soluble, well, like, able to be extracted well. If I can't extract them well, then people are not going to be able to do it at home on who knows what grinder or what have you. And I think that's always important to us too.
Yeah.
It's one thing if like you can make coffee taste amazing with amazing equipment, but most people don't have that. So like the coffee needs to be able to taste good all the time.
Right.
Um, and then also it not unique in this idea, but like as I mentioned, over time how the coffee tastes. I think we've really noticed that most of our coffees taste best. I mean, maybe a month or more out oftentimes. And it's just maybe that's the pro bat. It seems like everybody kind of feels this way, but I think just the way that the industry roasts anymore, like it's weird. We trained everybody so long to be like fresh, 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 and like sure, it needs to be fresh, but like that coffee a week old, it generally doesn't taste as good, let alone 24 hours old or whatever.
Yeah.
So like I think just it's seeing how those things over time is something that we also try to keep track of. We always have like a little bit of a backlog of like, the last couple of weeks worth of each coffee to be able to look back at and see how they're evolving.
Yeah. Yeah. I love the fact that you guys do have that cafe because, I mean, like you said, certain roasteries, they don't have that access to getting that QC like so fast. And
And it's real life QC too. Because like again, when you're in the lab, not even a cupping bowl, but like you sit there and you're gonna pull, 10 shots and get the perfect shot, and you're like, this is amazing. But like if you have a cafe, like every shot you pull isn't going to be that perfect God shot on at least on like a pure technical basis.
yeah,
So like how does it taste in the middle of a rush, like when things are slipping because the grinder's getting hot or it's cold this morning, so the grinder's a little colder or whatever. Like
yeah,
yes, we can massage those and do change those things, but if we're being honest, like not every coffee is going to be perfect. So like how does it react? Um,
yeah,
or like how does it react? Like, is it not possible again, solubility? Like, is it become a point where it's like I can't grind this fine enough or whatever it may be? Like those are all things I think you only find out by doing it.
mm. I'm genuinely just now realizing you, I presume then roast like the Omni roast,
Sure,
like
yeah.
and I love it. And I'm just now actually realizing, because so many, and I actually just kind of want your thoughts on, how many roasters are, they're all doing this, espresso roast and then, or profiling and then like a
Right.
filter profile. Why don't you do that?
Um, I mean, I think this was true and maybe still is kind of true. I think again, if you ask roasters who did espresso and drip, um, I mean, certainly more so when we first started doing it this way 10 plus years ago, when a lot more people had espresso and drip options. If you ask them like, what's what are you doing differently for your espresso versus your drip? Their answer is probably going to be they just roasted darker. And that's like because people were palates were a little bit averse to acidity, but also I think like just as an industry, not me, but like as an industry, I think we just weren't as good we didn't know much about roasting coffee as we do now. And I think we're
Mhm.
able to roast coffee that can be lighter and more soluble. So the issue way back when, like you go to like Illy or whatever, like the way they used to roast coffee or still do to roast coffee, it was roasted so dark purely because they couldn't extract it because espresso is so short a time frame and a short shot. Like it physically would not extract unless you were to roast it dark enough and make the bean more brittle.
Yeah.
So that's why it all started that way. And I think just roasters, both machinery and people. We've learned more and figured out how to be able to get both what we want, like keep more of the natural characteristics of coffee, but still make it physically able to be brewed under espresso. All
Yeah.
that to say, a Kenyan coffee on espresso, you can do it and hit numbers that are realistic.
Hmm.
If you don't like a acidic coffee, then it's probably not the coffee you want to pull on espresso. But like, are kind of okay with that. Like, you can pull
Yeah.
every coffee as espresso, and like, I will pull a Kenyan on espresso, and I think it's tasty. But
Yeah.
if you don't, that's perfectly reasonable too. I just think that if I was to take that Kenyan and be like, I want to do an espresso roast, I'm going to make it a way that it's just don't buy a Kenyan. Like that's basically what I'm gonna end up doing to it. I'm gonna end up making it like a coffee that's not what it is. So
Right.
what we always kind of focused it as was like, if you don't like an acidic coffee, espresso drip or otherwise, that's totally okay. We're just going to have on our menu at any given time, we're going to source coffees that we can roast in one way to show that coffee. And then just if you don't like one of the coffees, that's okay. There's other coffees here. versus trying to make every coffee palatable to every person. I think it's not it's just not doing that particular coffee justice.
Mhm.
Um, Also, to be completely honest, I think it's just a whole nother level of potential quality control and consistency issue too. You know, you're adding more variables that it's if you roast every coffee two ways, yes, you can do it, and I'm sure people do it consistently, but it is yet another thing to potentially go wrong. And I think that's the hardest thing for a roaster, even me today, is like being consistent roasting your coffee. There's so many variables that go into it that we can't always control. So it's one thing to be able to produce coffee that tastes good one day, but like forget about even just one day. Like we're doing 5, 10 batches of any given coffee back to back to back on the same day. They all need to be roasted the same way. So,
Mhm.
you know, if you're bouncing back and forth between like, oh, I'm roasting it this way and I'm roasting it this way, and now the roaster's maybe hot, and now you're going to this coffee and now it needs to be colder. Like it's just a whole nother extra layer that it doesn't necessarily,
Yeah.
at least to us, I don't think there's a benefit that much. Now, of course, if you want to offer a coffee that like just is like a more medium or darker roasted coffee to have as an offering, then of course that's why you would offer that coffee. But uh, I just would we generally would rather pick a coffee that is going to be naturally lower acidity, fuller bodied, and just have that coffee on the menu.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah,
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And it's just funny that almost all the roasters that we work with, except for a couple of the Asian roasters that we work with,
yeah,
all the European, there's a filter and an espresso roast.
yeah,
It's just interesting. And when we pull featured shots, we actually now we have well, we've been pulling featured shots on like an EK, but we just a couple weeks ago for the first time kind of got a second EK and Turkish burrs.
yeah.
And so, we're able to kind of play around with them more. And so we've always gotten the like filter version. We've
Right.
never,
And pulled it as espresso.
yeah. And
Yeah.
it's always worked for us. The only time, I think there was one or two times where we weren't able to pull a shot, but it was because it was, like an insanely fermented coffee that
Sure.
like pulled in 10 seconds or less. And it was like, okay, like fine, we'll have this on pour over instead, but
I think the other thing also, and I mean, this is not something I can control as much for other people, but again, talking about how things have changed, I think one of the other things, part of the reason we as an industry weren't able to extract coffee as well on espresso is because we were also pulling like 15 grams in and 25 grams out. Like that's really hard to extract coffee that way, but that's the way we pulled shots. Um, I'm not saying that everybody does this or it's as crazy, but I think Europeans still pull tighter shots in general than like we probably do in the US. And
yeah.
I certainly for us, like I think that's another way that we've figured out how to both extract coffee well, but also by pulling at like a wider ratio, we're able to kind of balance out some of those flavors a little bit more. So, I mean, at our shop, it's not uncommon to be pulling like 18 grams in and 50 grams out, or maybe even more. Like it's just kind of the the balance and the mouthfeel and the clarity that we enjoy. And that allows a little bit more room to pull like a lighter roasted or more acidic coffee because again, it just balances out better that way. But sure, if I was to pull it at 18 in and 30 grams out, like it's probably not gonna be what you want. And maybe I should roast it differently. But it's just not
Yeah.
it's not what we see most people doing anymore. So
Mhm. That's interesting. I did not realize that people used to pull shots like that crazy, like
yeah, things were always super thick. I mean, it was we're getting like 13% TDS and like just crazy, crazy numbers. But I mean, I will admit also, like by pulling shots the way that we prefer to pull shots, like yes, it can also sometimes be like it cannot cut through milk as well, especially if you're doing like an Ethiopian or something. Like that is a benefit of pulling like a tighter shot. But I think as an industry by and large, everybody pulls like 1 to 2 as a baseline at this point. So again, doing it that way, it is like it opens up the window for more expression with coffee. I mean, I remember like even when I first started making coffee, it was still very much a forget about espresso roast or drip roast. It was like, oh, we don't pull single origins as espresso, which is also kind of, I mean, it's especially mind-boggling to me now, but it's like, why? Like coffee is this, it's the same coffee. Like there's nothing special about it being a single origin. Um, but I mean, there are, I realize there are actual reasons that like, we used to play with solubility and that was a way to like balance out acidity and like all these kind of things. It also makes things more consistent. I think that was one of the big things with the blend is like by adding more components, even though there's more, it actually like that like Meritage makes it more forgiving in a weird way.
Yeah.
Whereas, sure, if you have just a single origin, even Colombia, and it's just not roasted as well, then yeah, you're gonna see it because there's nothing else to balance it back out.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, I remember that vividly of being like, I would just, it's only blends as espresso, whatever it may be. So
Yeah.
again,
It-
kudos to the industry as a whole for just like I think we've all just kind of improved a bit on what we're able to get out of these coffees.
oh yeah. It's super fun, and so at just for reference, and just for fun of these, what we do at our cafe, if I haven't told you before, is we always have three featured espressos.
Sure,
And they're kind of priced just different. One's usually five, one's usually like seven or eight, and then one is usually nine or ten. Like, and it's just very fun to be able to pull, all these little bit more expensive shots just to try
sure.
them differently. And
Yeah.
it's just we genuinely just have so much fun with it that like we can offer such unique espressos. I
Yeah, it's a great experience. I don't think you have to like espresso. It's perfectly reasonable to be like, I it just isn't for me. Like it is a weird experience, but at the same time, you can get like it's such a concentrated like both in like viscosity and like all that kind of stuff, but like just in a it's a concentrated expression of that coffee. So I think that's also why if the coffee is not roasted well, um, then it's going to exacerbate some of the issues that might actually be there. So that is again, it's why maybe coffees are sometimes roasted differently to be able to make it more forgiving or whatever it may be. But like, yeah, if the coffee, I don't think it's unreasonable to have coffee that like you actually think tastes fine on drip, but then you try to pull it on espresso and just like can't make it work. I think that it could just be because it's so amped up to 11 of everything that's in there, like, yeah, anything that's there is gonna peek its head out. Same thing with like age, it's part of the reason why like we just don't pull coffee on espresso that's like 5 days old because it's just like you're gonna notice all those characteristics of it still off gassing a lot more than maybe on espresso on drip. So
yeah
yeah,
yeah
but
yeah
it's really fun to be able to try. I agree with you. Like I love um like I almost like tasting a new coffee on espresso more than I do like out of a cupping bowl sometimes. Like it's not really practical. We can't do it as like your first touch all the time, but like to be able to really see like how what these flavors taste like really amped up is like kind of fun.
Yeah, it's funny. I am genuinely more so the drip coffee pour over person.
Sure.
Not the biggest espresso. Like I still love it and it's still interesting, but I will always veer towards the pour over version of whatever coffee. And both the assistant manager and the lead baker, Haley and Aaron, they're just both espresso people, and it's just
I mean, I definitely drink more coffee than I do espresso, but I also have the luxury of like being able to walk over to the shop and I'll pull a shot in the morning. I might have 2 sips of it and then like put the rest down the drain. Like I don't need to drink 3 ounces of espresso, but like I like being able to taste this. I also at this point, especially like I don't choose necessarily what's on espresso. So sometimes I'll walk over there and I'll be like, oh, this is the Donci's on espresso. Like I want an espresso. Like I want to try this. And so it's something I enjoy tasting. And I guess if I'm going to a brand new shop, I probably will order an espresso, but I will order like a drip as well.
yeah.
Um, Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I do think most of us drink more espresso than, or more drip than espresso, but I
Mhm.
like being able to taste it, even if it's not like my primary source of caffeine.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you roast coffee, there are different varieties, right? Or,
Right.
different varietals, are,
Yeah.
are there certain varietals that like act a certain way or some that are harder than others or like yeah, what's
Yeah.
that
I
like
mean,
yeah, from your perspective?
there's like there's the typical answers that probably everybody has. I mean, the Kenyan coffees are always or can be very finicky to roast. The big bean coffees like a Pacamara or Marigohipe or something like that, like they can be a little bit weird to roast. Um, Sometimes Ethiopia, but generally they're fine. They're pretty predictable. I think the easiest coffee if you're buying a coffee just to like try and figure out how to roast coffee is like probably a Colombian or like a Central American of some sort. It's probably going to be uh the least surprising. But at the same time, we take like from a pre-quality control point of view, like we know the moisture content of the coffee and things like that. But at the same time, there's definitely times where we throw a first batch of coffee in, like even a Colombian, and I roast it and I'm like, cool, 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 cool. What the hell is happening? Like, just sometimes you just don't know.
Yeah.
The coffee surprises you. And sometimes there's coffees that like you wouldn't expect to be particularly finicky, and then they just are. Like you'll wash high elevation Colombian and
Yeah.
it's incredibly finicky to roast. It's not common, but like these things do happen. And I think that's also why we sample roast, of course, and like we try to do some like rough profiling before it ever hits like the actual production roaster. But really until I throw a full batch of coffee into the roaster, making an educated guess of what it's gonna roast, until I get that first roast done, like you don't really know how it's going to behave, at least for sure, because it's just such a big different animal going from 100 grams to 30 plus pounds, like and bigger energy and everything. Um, so like getting that first batch in, of course, tasting it, seeing how it goes, and then just kind of iterating from there. But
Yeah.
um, I think a roaster's dirty secret also is like as long as you're buying good coffee, that first roast is probably going to taste good anyways.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, there's definitely times where that first batch has come out and I'm like immediately throwing another batch right back in before even tasting it because you're just like, this is not what I expected. Um, I think the other thing, honestly, probably the thing that I am most likely to be surprised with is probably a natural of some sort or like a weird process, like super sugary, fermenty something. I expect this to happen. I expect the coffee to be very difficult at the end of the roast and just like it just has so much energy, it just wants to like fly off the roaster. But I expect this to happen, but there's definitely times where even then it just surprises you and you're like, okay, it's going to be one of those coffees. That's really what it comes down to without like boring everyone the technicalities of roasting is like the whole part of the roast matters, of course, and like you're setting the stage for everything else that happens. But that last like minute and a half, 2 minutes is probably where the coffee is going to be troublesome one way or the other. That's probably where it's going to cause all your heartache. Um, Occasionally, a roast of coffee using a logical gas setting to begin with, and like it'll roast 30 seconds faster than what you expected. But like it's easy to adjust for and it's not really super common. It's more that end of the roast where everything can just go haywire and that's you learn from it. But some are definitely more finicky than others, and it's usually those like big beans or maybe like Kenyan coffees.
Huh. Is it, I know this probably sounds like a dumb question, but big beans, like a pacamara or the Mario Hibe, like, is it just because their mass is big? Is there like,
It's just hard to get the energy into them. That's kind of the reason that was like hard. Like Kenyan coffees are extremely dense. Like that's why Kenyans are kind of difficult. But yeah, the flip side's also true. There's these like giant beans that they just take a ton of energy to roast. It's actually like they're kind of hard to roast even on like a sample roaster because we're all pretty much using like air sample roasters nowadays, and it's hard to like get them to like really want to develop. Um,
yeah.
It's also, again, going back to the end of the roast, those giant beans, sometimes it's hard to keep enough energy in them at the end of the roast is basically what ends up happening. So like you have to try to just like blast it at the beginning, but they're not all incredibly difficult. There's definitely times where you're like, oh, this was fine, but yeah,
Yeah.
it's definitely you just look at the two beans side by side and it's pretty obvious to be like, this is probably going to be weird. Because I mean, they're just so big.
That's kind of funny. Well, speaking of Pacamaras, I'm actually genuinely excited to try the La Pradera because it is
Yeah.
natural Pacamara. So that's kind of funny. And it's a natural, so I don't know if that was
Also, it's a lot of Pacamara naturals, they're good coffees, but they're like generally like just a really sweet coffee, like a classic natural kind of coffee. And this coffee has like a ton of fruit. It's actually probably one of the most fruited Pacamara that I've at least personally had. That's not like some anaerobic yeast
right.
added something. It's a natural Pacamara and it's extremely fruity.
Yeah.
Um, it's also the first time in 4 or 5 years, however long we've been buying from Pradera, that we've actually been able to buy like full lots of natural from him. Most everything's been washed up until then. So we've been pushing for some naturals because I know he does a good job with them. And we were finally able to get some naturally processed coffee, and it's great. It's also will be interesting as a little bit of a spoiler is we also have a naturally processed geisha lot from them coming later this year.
Oh,
That is also interesting because the Praderas or the Pacamara is like really fruity and like it's not fermenty, but like it's more of that like fermenty kind of fruit. And the natural geisha is like couldn't be more different, and it's like just like really elegant and like really classy and like you maybe would still know it's a natural, but like it just doesn't. They're very different, even though they probably are processed very similarly. Um,
mm,
yeah.
yeah. Oh man, that's actually really exciting. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, it's a decent sized lot too, so it won't be like here for 2 weeks. We'll have it for a little bit.
Oh, I'm so excited. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been the geisha in particular is what I've been asking for the last like couple years. I was like, I know you have a lot of geisha. Can you please just like separate some out and like do a natural? Like you can do walk, it's cool, whatever. But like I know there's enough geisha here to do like a little bit of both. So maybe in a future year we'll be able to get like a double process, like side by side processing of the two of them. But for now, it's just a natural this year, and it's gonna be fun.
I'm very excited, very excited. So when you started roasting, and obviously you had to buy coffee
Yeah.
to roast. I mean, what was that process like in terms of, getting to the point where, you're trying to get coffee from producers and I mean, did you have producers in mind or, like what was that just process like? Yeah.
Uh, it was we've pretty much always, I mean, like, yeah, we've worked with some producers year over year, and I've been to Colombia, so like I've met some of the producers like La Pradera,
Yeah.
but for the most part, it's always been through importers, and I think for most roasters, it just is kind of what makes sense. I mean, it's incredibly difficult to find producers yourself and buy from them, and then let alone find somebody who wants to sell you coffee. But like, how are you getting out of the country? How are you getting into the coffee? How are you getting into the country? Um, and also, like, I think in large majority of cases, unless you are a very big roaster, like very big roaster, it probably doesn't behoove the farmer for you to be buying directly from them either, because most farmers are producing way more coffee than you're going to want to buy, or we're
Right.
going to be like selfish roasters who are like, I want this coffee, but like I have no interest in that coffee. And that like actually makes it more difficult for that farmer to then sell the coffee because they no longer can sell it as like a farm blend that's as good as it maybe otherwise would be or what have you. So
Right.
working with an importer, I think, as long as it's a reputable importer, which
Yeah.
most of them are nowadays, there's a lot of transparency in what they're paying the farmers and everything else. And
Oh yeah.
they're treating the farmers well. It's a better gig for the farmers. It's an easier gig for us. You have access to more coffees, all those kind of things. So, I mean, especially when we first started out, it was kind of like reach out to importers and, I don't know, it's kind of like being a kid, like looking at a Toys R Us catalog. You're just like, I want this, I want this, I want this. You just like grab it, like trying as many things as you possibly can. And I mean, we still do some of that, but I mean, of course, we still try lots of different coffees. But especially with the importers we've worked with for many years. They generally are sending us samples without me even having to like pick which ones I want because they know what we're going to like. And sometimes it's like, we're getting them before anybody else can see them because it's easier for them to know, like, again, like Chris is gonna like these really like fruit bomb Colombian coffees. Like, I'm gonna send him this coffee, and then like I'll send somebody else these coffees. And it doesn't mean we have to buy them, but like they at least can help curate a selection for us. Um, and more so that it just allows us to be able to get like more pre-ships and be able to get the good lots before they actually sell out. Because that's the other thing that was hard, I think, starting out was not a lot of importers don't bring over like a ton of coffee is spot, which is like coffee that is just sitting in a warehouse and nobody owns. It's
Right.
there's a good amount of coffee out there, but you are on a large level. And maybe I didn't even realize this at the time how much, but you are getting not that they're bad coffees, but you're getting like second pick. Like a lot, what you see there, you maybe see half of what that importer actually bought. There's
Mm.
probably twice as many coffees that just never saw the light of that list because they sent them to people like me at this point, and they're like, I know they're gonna like this. It could just be smaller lots. It could be relationship lots that people have bought over the last 3 years, so they get first dibs on them or whatever it may be. But yeah, so like we bought great coffees at the beginning, but I think it was
Yeah.
trying to decide like who are the reputable people who does coffee that we like, because there is also some of that. We get hit up by new importers all the time, and I'm always happy to try stuff and give feedback. But just like you may get samples from a roaster and be like, this is not our style, like you get that from importers too. There is definitely importers out there that like they're never gonna have like an anaerobic coffee, or like they're going to buy more traditional Colombians than like the really like acidic pinks or whatever it may be. Like you do kind of get a feel for like the importers, because you're kind of going through the importers like palette to some extent too, of like what that like they chose to buy this
Mm.
coffee. So
Yeah.
you kind of have to be uh, calibrated with them at the very least, let alone like the like ethical relationship with them.
Yeah. So the coffee that you currently get like every year, are you guys like at a place where you're still because these importers are like, hey, try this, like are you always kind of like looking for other coffees or are you kind
Yeah,
of
we definitely we buy more new coffees year over year than we probably do continuing coffees.
yeah.
Not necessarily by design, but there's a lot of times where, I mean, the coffee industry at a farm level is like changing a lot. C market is incredibly high. So I mean, even just like in a simple sense, especially over the COVID years, and it's probably happening again now because I think the C market just hit all-time highs again, like today. Um, but a lot of farmers that are like producing specialty coffee, um, it takes more work to produce higher quality coffee. And of course, they get paid more for it. But when the C market is as high as it is, it's kind of easy for them to be like, you know what, I'm just going to do less work and I'm just going to sell lower quality coffee, or maybe they'll even just sell cherry to another farmer who wants to then buy it. Like that's that's probably what makes sense for them. So it's not like I'm not mad at them, but because of even just that as just one example, let alone people who, maybe if they had a Roya or a really wet climate this year or whatever it may be, that like year to year things do change, that you don't always see everything come back. Or at
Mm.
least maybe they just don't come back in the way they were. Sometimes, maybe we found a coffee this year and we're like, I love this coffee, and then come around next year and it's it was a fluke, or maybe they just had an incredible harvest and have a terrible harvest this year. So it's you definitely can't just like have a blank checkbook of like, yeah, we're gonna buy this. But at the same time, the relationships that we have had over the years, yeah, like we are willing to basically commit to them to be able to buy them year over year so that they also know that they have that security as well. So, like the La Praderas and like the Las Perlitas and like mostly it's Colombian coffees because Ethiopia we probably buy a lot of the same mills, but at the same time, it's a giant mill. It's not a farmer.
Right.
Uh, Colombia is probably we're going to see most of the returners more than anything else for us. But yeah, like those coffees, our importer knows like we're good for a certain amount of coffee. It's just a matter of when we're going to take them.
Right. It is.
Especially our blend over the last couple of years. Um, we have like large outstanding contracts with them that allows the importer the freedom to be able to buy these coffees because they know like we just need so much of it. And the coffees we buy for the blend are they're like regional blends, which again it really helps the farmers and the importers because they're able to take the micro lots that might be like 2 bags here and 1 bag here and 3 bags here that like they can't really make into a lot, but they're
Yeah.
good coffees. It allows them to be able to buy those coffees from the farmers and then they go through their own QC at importing level, mill it all together, blah, blah, blah. But, we're able to get incredible coffee at more affordable pricing by being able to commit to those large quantities. And it really helps the whole chain all along the way.
Yeah. Speaking of blends, I don't remember if I've emailed you this, but the companion blend is, I think, my favorite blend ever.
I
Um,
mean, thank you. We didn't have a blend to begin with on another topic of like things we didn't do and eventually grew into. I think it was kind of like we didn't really want to have a blend until it was like there was a reason to have a blend. You didn't want to just have a blend and be like, well, this is what everybody does. We have a blend and it's like a Brazil and like a Colombia and it's good as under milk. Like we didn't want to just have the classic whatever. So when it became the time to do the blend, it was like, all right, like let's try to make sure it's something that is like better than the sum of the individual parts of those coffees. But also we wanted it to be a little bit different again than like your classic blend. Um, so we a lot of people, I'm not at all claiming that like we were the first people to come up with this, but you do see it more often now with similar components as us. But like we really wanted something that was going to have a good amount of fruit in it while still being something that you could drink day in and day out, make it as your house espresso or not, whatever it may be. So like we started off always having an Ethiopia in it, but not only was it an Ethiopia, but we've always had like at least 40% of the blend has been like a natural, like fruity coffee. And that was probably the thing we wanted the most was to be able to have something. Everybody has those first experiences of like um the coffee that tastes like blueberries or strawberries or whatever, and like be able to have something that was kind of like that without also like completely blowing your mind too much that it was like too weird. So that's kind of where we always started with it.
yeah.
Um, and I think we've stuck pretty true to it all the way. Our components are much more consistent now that we have like the two copies we have are like long-standing relationships with the importers, and again, we buy like tons of it from them every year.
Mhm.
But yeah, it was hard being able to always find every 3-4 months like coffee that was gonna be good enough because importers would want to give us like their grade three Ethiopias and stuff because that's what fits the price, and we're like cool, but like it's not fruity enough. And
Yeah.
I do think more than anything, even if you don't like the taste of our blend for whatever reason, I do think I will argue that we probably have one of the highest like quality for price of the blend. We probably should charge more for our blend than we do. The quality of the
Yeah.
components that are in the blend are oftentimes I've literally seen them on other people's menus, and I would sell them as such as well as like people's single origin, and they're in our blend. And um, yeah, I think that's what we wanted to make sure it was not just like a dumping ground for like old extra coffee that we couldn't sell. We wanted it to be like an intentional blend. And again, I'm sure other roasters do this. I know we're not special, but it's just we really wanted to make sure that it is, at least as good as our normal other offerings. And I think it really is.
Oh, it's incredible. I mean,
It's definitely the thing we sell the most of too. So
yeah. I mean, it literally, we stopped selling it on drip, which honestly, we just stopped because we were like, oh, we need something cheaper, as it is as a business. But when we stopped, like I kid you not, we probably had between 15 and like 25 customers,
Okay.
actually come back and just be like, why is the drip
Where'd
different?
it go? Yeah.
Like we were like, we're wondering the same. And it like to this day, like we all remember it. And so even today I told a couple of the employees who have been here and tasted the companion blend, I was like, it's coming back. And they were
Yeah.
like, let's go.
Yay.
So,
Yeah, I think it's a really fun coffee because it's like it's classic enough. It's not gonna be like, why am I drinking tea? It tastes really good under milk, but again, it's not going to like completely freak anybody out. It's not like a huge acid bomb, even though it has like some amount of fruit to it. But also like as a drip, the fruit really comes through. Like a lot of people use it as an iced coffee, and it's great as an iced coffee. All those kind of things. I think it's very versatile coffee. And again, the sales at least show like we sell so much of it. Sometimes I actually kind of resent the blend because we sell way more of it than like anything else. And I'm like, please buy the other coffees. But yeah, it's the problem with putting really tasty coffees in it, I guess. So it's in a weird way, it's a I mean, it's definitely a success, but it's like a compliment, I guess.
That's right. That's right. I'm dying. Well, to kind of wrap this up, because we've been chatting for a while, just in general, I think the last question, that I had sent you, looking at the specialty coffee industry, is there anything that you kind of, I don't know, want to see the industry do, or you want things to happen, or yeah, I don't know, like what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'd be curious. I don't know why I'd be curious in this because it's not like I'm gonna go like buy a whole new roaster or anything. But like I'm always excited as like a gear kind of nerd to see like all the new toys that are coming out. Like there's been such great like um progress in like grinders and espresso machines, especially like things that have basically not changed in 20 plus years, and now we're like really innovating on them. I think that's really fascinating. Even if it maybe goes nowhere, at least like we've probably learned something along the way. So I'd be curious to see like what happens with roasters. I know I was like kind of bearish on some of the new technology of roasters, but like it's something that's new, and there's definitely new iterations already coming out with the things with like the Typhoon and the Strongholds, and like there's a ton of new stuff coming out there. So I'm both curious about like what that technology looks like 5, 10 years from now, but also like maybe what we learn from it, like roasting. I think there's still so much to be learned about like what we're actually doing in these like 10 minutes of roasting coffee that like, yeah, we know this, and this probably means it's going to taste good, but and we probably do know some of the whys, but I think just being able to, what is the roast that's like the equivalent of going from a 1 to 1.5 ratio of espresso to a 1 to 4 and realizing, oh my God, this is like so different. Like, what is that with roasting? Maybe there's nothing, I don't know. But like that's what's kind of interesting. I think will be interesting to see how that changes. Otherwise, I mean, industry's gotten so much better, but I always like seeing the growth on the front of like again that community and like the collaboration between like coffee shops and roasters are still a little less so. I like to think I'm pretty open myself if people want to reach out, but it's still like it's been so like I said when we started everything was so like kind of selfish or standoffish or like we just treated everything too precious, and I think it probably hurt the industry as a whole for a while. So like again it's night and day different and everybody's much better, but just continue to see that grow and realize that at the end of the day, we certainly look at ourselves, at least on the cafe, as like we're way more of like a service than we are a product. Like we've always thought the cafe, I don't want you to come in and be like, oh, well, like this coffee is this, and this, and this, and that's why it's going to be amazing. Like, I'd much rather be like, here's a black coffee, and then you come back and be like, what the hell was that? Than me have to like hype it up for you. Like, you know what I mean? We want to create a good experience for you. And then, not that the coffee is secondary, but like, it shouldn't be like the thing that jumps out first and foremost necessarily to like your experience in our coffee shop.
Yeah.
just like continue to see how that grows. I mean, obviously espresso machines and automation and all of that is changing. So like as that continues to grow, again, the service is what's going to matter more. If we can all push a button and get the same coffee, um, maybe the roasting matters a little bit more because that's all you really have to choose from. But you have to make a good experience for that customer, or they're just going to go to somebody else who's just going to do it slightly better. My favorite story that I've definitely told over and over, and I'm pretty sure I stole from somebody else at some point, is like there's a lot of people that, they'll come to you and they'll be like, I was just in Costa Rica. I visited a coffee farm. It was beautiful, and I had the best coffee of my life. And you're like, yeah, you might have, but also you were on vacation. You were in Costa Rica. You saw the guy pick the farm. It was gorgeous. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's gonna taste good because it was an awesome vacation and time and experience. Like, that's why it tasted good. And
Mhm.
that's what we try to create at like the cafe. And I think is the most important thing is like, why do we all do latte art? Like, yeah, it's fun for us, but it certainly doesn't make the coffee taste better. It's
Yeah.
because when you put it in front of somebody, their first expectation is to be like, oh my God, that's incredible. And
Hmm.
it probably is going to alter their perception of the coffee to be like, it's probably going to taste good.
Yeah.
Of course, you have to follow through on these things, but like that to a lesser extent, like that's why, that's what we look at the service experience to be as. And, we're never going to be all things to all people, but like we can try to be like open and create that like Costa Rica experience for them so that by the time they take a drink out of their coffee, they're like, oh, this is really good because they're in a good mood. They're having a good time with a friend.
Yeah.
Um, the barista was nice to them, whatever.
Oh, yeah. No, I love it. That actually even that was something I was reading on, I think your guys' website or something, of just, being a cafe that's part of the community.
Yeah,
And I was just, as funny as it is to read that, it was really nice to read because I feel like all these days it's like we're roasting the best coffee in the world and
sure.
best coffee. And so I was just very glad to see. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it's hard to market yourself as a roaster, especially because like we're all kind of saying the same thing, and honestly, we're all probably buying, if not the same, well, maybe not literally the same coffee, but we're buying like very similar coffees, if not the same coffee. All the coffee is of good quality, but I think the thing that it's going to be an increasingly difficult road, or like we have to make sure we don't lose sight of, as at least as a roaster and to a lesser extent cafes, is again like coffee is incredibly expensive. Everything is, sure, but like it is a luxury for most people. So I think we just have to be careful we just don't take it for granted. And of course there's on the sustainability front of like making sure that we have coffee to brew 20 years from now, but like just if we are not careful or like continue to make the coffee and the coffee experience like worth everybody's time and maybe more importantly money, then like we may not have like specialty coffee because nobody's going to pay our absurd prices. I mean, again, as soon as next year, like we all might have to raise prices again. And yes, they're seeing it everywhere, but at some point things are going to have to give, and or it needs it. You have to make sure it's still worth. You're fighting for that spot in everybody's wallet. So, um, and our at least what we can control is like the experience and trying to make sure when we ship it off that it's a good as good as we can put out there, at a fair price. But yeah,
Absolutely.
it's an interesting time. It'll be interesting to see how things continue to change, and great for the farmers. But yeah, it's um, definitely a little bit of an uphill battle as people are paying, $7 for their latte coming soon. So
Mhm. Tell me about it. Well, man, I really appreciate your time, Chris. I know, almost an hour and a half's a long time, so I appreciate you taking it out of your week to.
no, of course, I like to. You have to stop me sometimes. I can yap, so
No, I love it, and
not a
that's what
problem.
this was for, which is perfect. Well, are you still? I think we had mentioned a possible you coming to St. Louis, and
Yeah, hopefully we can make some time in the spring. I think that's what we're hoping for. Yeah.
we would love it, Chris. Again, obviously we'll email and chat, but yeah,
Yeah,
we
of
will.
course.
We'd love to host you and provide everything for you guys. It would be way.
I think we're definitely it's on our list of things trying to make happen. So we'll definitely be in touch.
I love it. Awesome. Well, thanks again, Chris. I hope
Thank
you have a
you.
great evening,
You
and
too.
yeah, we'll chat soon.
Thanks so much. Have a good night.
Bye.